Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I came to this project, which was my COVID-19 project. It kept my head from exploding, to work on an actual book. And I came to it with a certain amount of arrogance. I've been a writer for so long, I couldn't imagine that writing a memoir was really going to be all that different from doing all kinds of other writing. And I was wrong. And what I wanted to do, instead of just inviting people to, come and hear my book talk and let me sign a few books, what I wanted to do more than that was to help people who might be thinking about writing their own memoirs. I want to save you a little time, because I really did stumble around for a while before I figured out some solutions to the problems I was having with writing my own memoir. Thus, here we are. So, without further ado, let me introduce myself. This is the picture where you can watch me age. These are all of my old IDs from the Lawrence Eagle Tribune, the Hartford Courant, the Day, the New York Times. At one point, I really have no idea why the Times wanted to make me a blonde, which my son always said to me, "You're not turning gray, Mom, you're a beautiful blonde." So I guess it came true then. And I've got a weekly Substack column that I send out for about 3,600 subscribers, more or less. You're welcome to subscribe. I would be honored if you did. And I wrote this book, I began writing it 5 years, almost to the day of when it was published in April. And what helped me a lot is that I kept diaries since I was 12 years old. There's a chapter in the book about the teacher that encouraged me to do that. And it really became almost a therapy for me, almost a source of solace and a feeling that I had that a page would always listen to me. When nobody else listened to me, an empty page would always listen. But I treated it like just a thing that would give me a little outlet. And I never reread them. So I would finish a notebook, I would toss it in a box, and I would never reread these things until I had several crates in the attic that I had never reread. And when I began to write this book, I thought, I think I better read what I thought when I was a teenager, because that was the narrative arc that I chose. So my poor son had to haul them all over to the barn where I have an office. So I was a diary keeper. I was a journalist. I am a journalist. I'm a writer. And as you'll find in the first few pages of my book, I am also a thief. So I'm going to read the first paragraph or two. The floorboards groaned. The noise cracked in the silence between my father's wheezing snores. I froze on all fours in full view of Dad's mountainous form, now my panic rising. Other kids might learn how to knit or hunt or cook, whether by family tradition or necessity. At the age of 11, I learned to steal from my father, and I was damn good at it. So I wanted to put the reader right in the middle of the action. And that's why I chose that as a beginning. And I'll go into that a little bit more later. This is my sister Ellen. She was always bigger and stronger, louder, more charismatic. My mother used to introduce her to people saying, "This is my daughter Ellen. She is going to be the first president of the United States to win as a woman." And I'm the one with the belly button, so she's the one with the baseball bat. And my mother was always proud of her being an extrovert, her being an athlete. She could throw a football as far as my brothers, who were 15 and she was 9. She was kind of amazing. So it made it a pleasure to write about her. As I mentioned, writing memoir taught me a lot. You got to figure out where to start. Where do you find the narrative arc? And I have a little later, this is sort of an outline, what rule to help you decide what to write about and what to pitch overboard. How to write about painful memories, which is really can be very difficult. And how the fact is that some memories are near fantasies, how to figure out what's unreliable and what really happened and how to check them. And I found out that some sensational stories in my family were utter myths, which really kind of amused me in the end. And then how to end it, which might be more obvious at the beginning than as you go along and begin to write about all the complications of your life. If you're serious about writing memoir, run, don't walk, and get this book. It's about $10 on Amazon. It is excellent. I make it a habit whenever I don't want to write to buy another how-to writing book. I've got a library. And it's all a tribute to the art of procrastination. I would much rather read about how to write than actually do it. But this book was excellent in every sense of the word. Mary Carr wrote the Liars Club, which was a big deal in the 1990s, but she went on to teach memoir writing at Syracuse University. And before she wrote this book, she read 200 memoirs. So it is replete with good advice and funny observations. It's an easy read, and it's also very, very practical. And it really helped me out a couple of times. So alone, of all my libraries, of all of my how-to books, this one's the queen. So, number one. Do you like my granddaughter Riley there with her little girl power fist? That was taken about 10 minutes after she was born. She's ready. Don't start the day you were born if you're going to write this. If it's for your family, what the heck? Go for it. But if you have any inkling that you would want to write for publication, to write to maybe get the book out there to people, don't start the day you were born unless there's something that intrinsically important that happened the day you were born. You were left in a dumpster for a kind person to find. I knew a woman who was working on a memoir, this is many years ago, called Fingerprint Baby. And I said, why the title? She was a lady I took care of in a nursing home. And she said, because my fingerprints and my footprints when I was born were the first one used at a hospital before they established that as a practice that they would continue. And so in her case, it made all kinds of sense to start with the day she was born because it was relevant to the story. But for most of us, not so much. Start in the middle of the action. You might notice that I started when I was doing something I was stealing from my father, and this might strike you as being very odd, but it took me many years to figure out that was a pretty whacked out thing to do, that was not normal, although I think we should put a needle point. There is no such thing as a normal family, but as I had my own children, I was a little appalled that ever happened, and yet I could see the necessity. So I wanted to thrust the reader into a situation that they're going to be saying, what is going on in this family? What is going on? And that's why I chose that particular scene to start. And then I did a lot of backtracking and going back and forth, but at least it helps the reader understand that they are in the middle of a family situation that might be a little bit unusual. And in your memoir writing, think hard about where you want to start. You want to interest the reader right away. In movie making, there is something called the inciting incident. And the inciting incident is the event that happens where there's no going back, and it affects the rest of the book. Now, that wasn't stealing from my father. That was when my sister came down with kidney disease, but it came a little bit later in the book. And in my first draft, it was like page 110, and I thought, wow, you know, if the book's named Saving Ellen, I'd better move her up. And I moved her to page 30. So just to give readers a sense of where they were going. But it's always important to know where you want to start. And I always recommend start when something's happening. Question everything. This became very interesting in my particular story. My mother always told this marvelous story about how she and my father got married in February. They didn't want to wait. You know, February is not a great time in Buffalo, New York, but they wanted to do that. And so, of course, she always told me, there was a snowstorm on the day they were going to get married, and my father gallantly picked her up and walked her up the steps of the church. And when they came out, the snowstorm was over, and the whole world turned into almost like a scene of diamonds. The sun was out, the snow covered everything, the world was made new. And I thought, well, what a wonderful story. I should include that. Except, I thought, isn't it a little too good to be true? So I went to Weather Underground. And Weather Underground, for those of you who might not know, is a website where you can check the weather anywhere in the United States historically. So if you want to know what the weather was like in Hawaii on, December 7th, 1941, you can check it. If you want to know the weather when your parents got married, you can check it. And so I looked up February 5th, 1949 in Buffalo, New York, and not one fat snowflake fell on that day. Not one. So I thought, well, maybe it was a rehearsal dinner. They have to go to the church for the rehearsal dinner. That would have been the day before. Let me check February 4th, 1949. That was the 1 week in Buffalo when there was no snow. So I don't know where my beloved mother got the story, but I wasn't about to include it in the memoir, so I pitched it. But that's just going to be helpful, and maybe you'll get lucky, and you'll even find a better story in Weather Underground or whatever thing that you checked. Lately, in the last few months, I wanted to write about a man I knew, and who I had always been told won a Bronze Star in World War II, 3 Purple Hearts, and had been in Merrill's Marauders and the Flying Tigers, both very, very prominent military units. And I found that George, who had always spun these tales, got no closer to that than like Kansas. There's nothing on his records because I asked for them, I sent away for them. So it's always great before you start typing just to check things out, unless you want to write family myths, which is okay. eBay for old newspapers and the ads. At one point, I remembered buying one of the early air conditioners for my mother as she was developing heart disease. And I thought I remembered that I paid $500 for it in 1977, but I checked and there's no way, unless I got something to run a whole building, that it was that expensive. So it becomes really useful to look on the internet and kind of question things, just to know that you're not hallucinating. So Memoir does not have to be a James Bond film, but events need a purpose. The scenes have to move the plot forward. And events, don't think of events just as things that happened. Think of events as something that reveals character, because the way you react to something will show, one way or another, who you are. Character is revealed by choices made under pressure. They reveal our humanity and who we are, and leave out anything that doesn't move the story forward. So now I'm going to be in a little trouble because I don't know the password here for the internet. So this is a 2-minute video, and anyone can find it on the internet. Trey Parker and Matt Stone gave advice for structuring a story. And what they said was, there are many, many, many movies and plots and scripts that will have a structure that goes something like this. And then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And if you have that as what is in your particular book or story, you're screwed. Because it's got to be this. It's got to be this happened, and because that happened, then this happened. And because that happened, it caused another thing to happen. It's all got to link up like a train. And I found in the middle of writing my book, I could tell that there were things that just, they weren't working. They weren't working until I stumbled on this lovely video, which I can't really show you right now. And I realized that I was structuring a part of the story that went, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. Screw that, it's boring. I had to make sure one thing was sparking another thing. And this is really helpful. Let me see. Yeah, they can't load the page, so I will just keep going here. Okay, so in the middle of my book was the day when I was 12 and I was sexually assaulted. And actually, I used this not just for my book, but because I wanted to write an op-ed when there was questions about Justice Kavanaugh during his hearings. But in all of my years, as a columnist, as an editorial writer at the New York Times, at The Day, at the Lawrence Eagle Tribune, at the Hartford Courant, I had never been able to write about this. I was able to talk about it. I didn't talk about it to many people, a very small handful of people, my husband, my kids, my sister. But I wanted to write about it, and I found I was really paralyzed. I was just stuck. So in The Art of Memoir, she had fabulous advice for this. And her advice was just to take that event and write it out in whatever way you want to do that. Now, I have a typewriter collection. I love typewriters. So I took my Underwood No. 5 from a 1925 secretarial school in Chicago, and I decided to type it out. And I ended up typing 5,000 words, like just everything I remembered. And then the advice was, okay, so you got it. It took me 3 days. Throw it in a drawer and walk away. Just put it aside. And I put it aside, and I came back to it a couple days later, and I reread it, and I thought, I can do this. And I have no idea what was so therapeutic about that, or maybe I needed to give myself permission, but I found a way that I could write about this. And I was very grateful to The Art of Memoir for just giving me that idea. And so when it came time to write about it for my book, I could do it. I knew I could do it. So, number 5. We talked about this a little bit. Fact is neutral, but truth is the meaning of events. And sometimes what you'll find is that some of the things that happen to you in your life have a universal truth. That's why I love reading Memoir, because there's a universal truth to some of these, and you want to get at that. eBay is your friend because they sell the damnedest things. And what I found I was really puzzled about, and I couldn't find any help for this, was my sister had a very early kidney transplant in 1970. And just to tell you how early this was, until early 1964, the state-of-the-art way to help patients try to avoid rejection after what was then a very rare organ transplant was to expose them to full body radiation to kill off enough white blood cells that they would slow down the rejection. And it was so crude that some people actually got sick from radiation sickness, until a very smart, very young doctor in Denver, Colorado, in December of 1963 said, here's what we're doing. We're using steroids, massive doses of steroids, and that really helps with the rejection. So my sister's kidney transplant was in 1970. It was only 6 years after. They were irradiating people to help them get through this operation. But I could not find out how rare it was that she had this kidney transplant. You can go on the internet, and back until 1988, you can find any statistic on any organ transplant you want to do, anything. But before 1988, it's a blank slate. So I turned to eBay. And on eBay, for the princely sum of $5, I found a book of medical statistics going back into like the 50s on every statistic on organ transplants of kidneys, kidney transplants in particular, in the United States. And they told me exactly, this book told me exactly how rare Ellen's transplant was at the time of her transplant. She was around number 3,000 that had ever happened. And that year, there were 400 kidney transplants between a living donor and a recipient. My mother, in this case, was the living donor. There were 800 transplants from cadaver kidneys, and the cadaver kidneys were really not very, very successful. They couldn't figure out what made a good transplant, what made a good cadaver kidney. They would buy blood type, and they just didn't know all kinds of stuff we know now on a microscopic level. So most of those would reject within a year. But living organ transplants, they knew even then it had a much better chance. And if I didn't go on eBay, I never would have been able to figure it out. And just to give you some perspective, Ellen was around number 3,000. There had been 660,000 kidney transplants since. So she was kind of a pioneer. But without eBay, would I know that? I don't think so. So interviewing is always great. People love to be interviewed. That's the first thing I found when I was a journalist, that people love to be asked questions about themselves. They love it. So don't be afraid to do that. And what I realized, I had to track down one of Ellen's doctors. She had two surgeons. They were both in their 90s. They died soon after I began to make inquiries. I hope I didn't push them over the brink. But I also knew that she had a very young, very talented doctor from Great Britain named Mary Hawking, whose brother became world famous, Stephen Hawking. And so I thought to myself, I'll bet Stephen had a foundation, and I'll bet she's got a seat on the board. And she did. I found her within 5 minutes, could track her right down. And sent out an email to the foundation, and within 5 hours had an email back from Mary saying how lovely to hear from you. And she was the kind of doctor who was not afraid to get close to her patients. She ended up in Buffalo because she was working in New York City, and the city leaders decided it would be really smart to save money to cut residents' salaries in half. And she wasn't going to do that. Buffalo offered her a full salary, so she ended up being my sister's very young, very brilliant doctor. And she wasn't afraid to get close to her patients. So we loved her. She'd come over for dinner. I mean, it was really, really a nice relationship, but I hadn't seen her in 40 years. And our interviews over Skype were just a godsend. Her parents were pack rats. They kept all of her letters from Buffalo. She was able to tell me Ellen's exact dosage of medications and things like that. So it was a terrific thing. And she said to me later, "You got me through COVID." So we're still in touch. I talked to her last week, and I'm going to visit her next year. So just keep that in mind. Do your interviews. Do research. Newspapers.com. You can probably get a really cheap subscription. I got a cheap subscription, and I could check all sorts of things in the Buffalo News archives. And if you just visit the setting of your memoir, every setting, it seems to me, has especially a special smell, Like I used to, when I was in Russia, I was in Russia a few times covering stories. I would say the Moscow subway always has this smell, And you'll never know until you go there, go to the source of some of your memories, what will come up. So that's always great. So finally, just sift through those memories. Readers love to be surprised. There's a brilliant man, if you get very serious, who teaches a course in New York on story structure called Robert McKee. And he always says the trivial told brilliantly is better than the profound told badly, which I always kind of liked. And I think everybody should write a memoir, and I hope you guys do. I was glad I did, and I've been having a blast talking about it. And this is me. I have not, this is kind of false advertising. I did not put my boat in the water this year. I knew I'd be too busy doing library talks and things like that. But I always say this, if you read my book, please write a review on Amazon or Goodreads. And I have copies of my book, and I'm happy to read an occasional excerpt if you'd like. So that's me, and I'm all done.